I worked in a Waffle House for almost 2 years, mostly night shifts, and I saw some wild things in my time. I saw a lot of drama and a lot of stuff that made me laugh my butt off, but it was rare that anything actually creeped me out or scared me. But then the one thing that I actually did take home with me has stayed with me for quite some time. We had a guy pull in just after 6 a.m. on a Sunday, dressed like he was headed to church and with all the same kind of cheerfulness too. I remember his order like it was yesterday: steak and eggs, extra hash brown, with biscuits and gravy on the side. Man ate like a king that morning. Then as he sat there, over a clean plate and as the customers were filing in here and there, I remember seeing him make a phone call. And after that, he just sort of sat there and waited. When 2 cops first walked in, people looked up, but only in the way that they would if any other kind of customer walked in. We get a lot of police officers on and off duty thanks to the 10% law enforcement discount that we offer, so it's not uncommon to see them walk through the door. But to see them walk straight up to our well-dressed churchgoer and pull the handcuffs straight out, that didn't just draw everyone's attention, it pretty much demanded it. He just stood up, turned around, let himself be handcuffed, and the cops walked him out of the building and out to the patrol car. One of the cops drove the guy off, then the other came back to recommend that we just close for the day. Forensics were about to be all over the guy's car, and it'd be one hell of a bad look to have an active crime scene in our parking lot. My supervisor touched base with management, and they agreed that having people watching all that CSI stuff over their breakfast melts was probably a major no-no. And about an hour later, we'd closed down the restaurant, and I was walking to my car just as they were pulling the first body out of that guy's trunk. I caught one glimpse, then averted my eyes because I instantly recognized that the body was small, child-sized, and I did not want to deal with the memory of seeing a dead kid like that. I texted some coworkers later on saying how I was pretty sure that they pulled a kid out of the guy's trunk, and then a few days later, the whole story broke on the news. The well-dressed, cheerful customer who ordered his steak and eggs, extra hash brown, with biscuits and gravy on the side, had killed his whole family that morning before he decided to drive them to a Waffle House. The guy must have known that, in the very best-case scenario, he was going to jail for the rest of his life. Worst case, he'd just be up for lethal injection. But before any of that, before he had to face the music, the guy wanted a few final plates from his favorite breakfast place. And I swear to God, I would never ever have guessed what a terrible thing that guy had done. The way he came up to the counter, like it was just your average Sunday morning, it was like the part of the guy's brain that accounted for emotion was just gone, or broken. I can't even imagine the kind of headspace that I'd be in if I just annihilated my own family. I lose my appetite whenever I even get remotely stressed out. So the idea that this guy bashed in his 2 kids' brains and then thought, I could go for some biscuits and gravy right now, that's just about the creepiest, most haunting thing I've ever been unfortunate enough to cross paths with.
I'm a 26-year-old female. But when I was 8 years old or so, and my brothers were 10 and 6, something happened that would change everything for my family. Both of my parents were police officers. Most people would think that there's nothing to be afraid of when your parents serve to protect. But my brothers and I were not prepared for what the next few years had in store for us. My parents' relationship began to get rocky when my stepdad reconnected with a woman that he knew. At first, it was just friendship, or so my dad thought, but this woman wanted so much more. To this day, I still don't know if it was an affair, but my parents are still together to this day. This woman was obsessed with my dad. She began calling the house to talk to my dad, and when my mom tried to put a stop to it, she started leaving ungodly, threatening voicemails on the answering machine. She was saying things like, I'm going to slaughter you and your children, and then your husband will be all mine. My dad blocked her number from the house phone, but then she had started mailing sickening letters. It got to a point where my mom tried to get a restraining order. After a year or two, the letter stopped, until one night my brothers and I were playing games on our Super Nintendo in their room, demolishing each other in Street Fighter, when we then heard scratches at the bedroom window. Spooked, my little brother ran and told my mom. With the gun cocked and loaded, she proceeded to check around the house where she finds a knife where this woman tried to cut the screens off the windows. I guess trying to break in? After that, my mom installed a security system on the house. A really nice one too. Every entry of the house had to have a code to get in. The alarm tripped a few times, but after that, nothing. A few months pass and we all come home from the mall in Atlanta to find an envelope taped to the front door. Inside were pictures of the inside of our house. The Polaroid kind that you had to shake to develop, including a detailed message on how she would expose us. Well, after that, my parents sold the house and we moved away. It really makes me sad because I really loved that house. So just a detail before everything. This takes place during my mid-20s, and at the time I had no idea that I had cyclothymia, so I didn't know how to regulate my mind, and my life was quite an emotional mess. It was summer of 2020, and I was back in town after a long while. At the time, I was living in my grandmother's apartment for work-related reasons, which was in the worst part of town. My friend was living 10 minutes from my grandmother's place, so I used to see him often. We used to play video games, have long talks about life and future, smoke weed, and so forth. Usual best friend stuff. That night though, as I thought about going home around 2 in the morning, my friend told me that he had the end of a whiskey bottle and that we could drink a glass to enjoy my return to town. We rolled up 2 cigarettes, poured 2 glasses, and then went walking in the night around the lot in a park and just continued our discussion. As we were talking outside under a street lamp, we saw a car with a bunch of guys. They had just passed the street, but we didn't think much about it. It was just a car passing by, was what we were thinking. After the glass and cigarette, we decided to go back to the apartment. On the way, we saw 2 of the 3 guys in the street passing us yet again. One of them then exclaimed, "Yo, that's them!" but seemed to look away behind us. Again, we didn't think too much about it and just continued to walk. When we arrived, my friend said I could stay on the couch for the night because it was pretty late, but I knew I would be home in 10 minutes by bike, which by the way is a rented city bike, which is important for later, and I didn't want to bother his roommates, so I just said no. I added that I was used to this, so there was really no problem and he shouldn't worry. Boy, was I wrong. I packed my stuff and said goodbye to my friend, put on my headset and rode towards my grandma's place. After 1 minute, I saw a sketchy guy on the road and I just put some distance and that was it. I turned to take the usual shortcut, a narrow path with a big rock at the entrance to avoid cars on the street. But this time there was a car stopped right there, all doors open and the engine still on. Now, it didn't surprise me too much because there were a lot of these in the neighborhood. As silly as I was, I just assumed it was the way these groups hung out together. Smoking pot, music blasting out of these open cars. It was something that I used to see every night in the environment that I was living in at the time. The thing is, the path being too narrow, I couldn't just pass by speeding on my bike. So I got off the bike and started walking by, only to jump back a few meters further and then ride again. When I was a few meters from the car, a man appeared from the complete darkness with a disturbing grin on his face. I realized that there were at least 3 other guys behind me, just standing there watching. The guy came in just in front of me, squeezing my front wheel between his legs, silent and staring at me with his disturbing smile. My brain was on full alert, but I was feeling slow and hazy because of the substances that I had in my system prior. I rolled the bike back and started to turn back, saying something like, "Okay, I got it." In the middle of my turn, the man repeated himself, squeezing the wheel again. Suddenly, he grabbed the back of my neck with his hand, forcing me to lean down. Now I knew I was in a real shitty situation. He was making fun of me, saying to his friends, "Oh, what am I gonna do now? What am I gonna do now?" and laughing like a maniac. Just so you know how this is hilariously stupid, people usually say that I look like a nice and chill guy, and I have round glasses. That guy was rather muscular, shirtless, and full of bad hash and cocaine. At some point, I had managed to free myself from his grip and then took a few steps back and turned. I was now facing back to him, and that's when he threw a punch on the side of my head. White flash, I fell on the ground head first on my back. I was hyperventilated and in a state of shock. He started to search in my pocket and bag, took my phone, headset, papers, everything that I had on me. I then heard the voice of a girl saying, "Enough! Leave him alone already!" But he didn't pay attention as he was going through my papers. She obviously knew him and was part of their group. Lying down on the road, I was now paralyzed in fear. I remember I was afraid to draw attention on myself if I tried to stand up. Also that I was afraid he would just beat me up and break my arms and legs or roll over me if they decided to go, as the scene just took place near the back of the car, but apparently more interested in my belongings. I decided to stand up. The girl standing near the guy looked at me and then said, "You need to go now." So I took my bike and started to walk away. The other guys were around watching in complete silence. Then suddenly, I heard the man screaming, "I'm gonna kill you!" Absolutely terrified, I threw the bike and started to sprint toward my friend's flat. I heard him run behind me on almost the whole street before he gave up. I've never ran that fast even in sports class. I knocked at my friend's door. I couldn't breathe. He opened the door, sat me down, called the police, and then gave me a huge glass of water. I woke up his roommate. He appeared more annoyed by all of the noise and the fact that I could have brought these men to the apartment than anything else. I finally slept on the couch. This isn't even the end of my nightmare. The next day around noon, I had called my friend asking him to help me try to search for anything they would have left behind. We met at the scene. I found my now empty wallet, and he found a little sachet full of cocaine. I also found a dead crow. On my way back, I had noticed a car very similar to the one of last night in a street nearby. It wasn't moving, but the engine was on. It was bright daylight and I was going home to sleep. When I arrived in the parking lot of my grandma's place, I heard a car honking. I turned back. It was the same car I saw earlier. It just stopped in the middle of the empty road. The men were throwing me a killer look, screeching tires, and they were then gone in seconds. I was now extremely paranoid. I walked to the doors, looked all around if anyone was watching me, removed my name from the letterboxes, and then went inside. That night, I just laid in bed with a butcher knife right under my pillow. They all had the information about me. I was absolutely terrified that they would come back at night and hurt my grandmother. The next day, I headed back to my parents in the countryside. Again, this is not even the end. For no reason, the town's bicycle agency refused to take the police report about the bike theft, so I had to pay the full penalty. I've lived like a recluse for about 2 years at my parents in the countryside, feeling highly depressed. I felt like no one could understand my distress, and no one would try to help me at the moment. I felt alone. What still really disturbs me to this day is the fact that even after he mugged me and had all of my possessions, he still wanted to beat me up only for sadistic pleasure. I'm so glad that I have good legs and that I was able to run and get away. I now have severe PTSD when I try to sleep, and also a lot of anger and feeling of injustice inside of me.
A couple of years ago, I was at home by myself one night. It had been a long day of work, and I was happy to be back home. I lived in a smaller house that I was renting, which I moved to because of my work. On this night, I ordered a pizza online and was going to have it delivered. A while later, the doorbell rang, and I knew that was the pizza, so I went to the front door and I opened it. A man was standing there with the pizza, and I took it from him and gave him his tip. Before I closed the door, though, The man asked me if he could come inside and use my restroom. Now, I really don't know why, but I said yes. I didn't want to say yes. I didn't want the guy in my house because I didn't know him at all. And obviously, I should not have let him. I don't really have an excuse or an explanation, but I guess it was just a reaction to say yes, so I did. The guy didn't immediately come across as strange or anything, so I told him that it was just down the hall and to the left. The house was not that big, and it was pretty easy to figure out where everything was. So the guy went down the hall and into the bathroom. I was slightly nervous because I didn't know him at all, but less than a minute later, he left the bathroom and then walked back to the front door. Then he left. After that, I was able to have my pizza. However, hours later, I was still up. I was just relaxing in the living room, and it was probably around midnight. Suddenly, there was a knock on my front door. I didn't know who it could possibly be at this hour. I walked over to the door and looked through the window. It was the pizza delivery guy from earlier, but he was not in his pizza uniform anymore. When I looked at him through the window, he saw me. After seeing that he noticed me, I felt like I had to answer. So I opened up the door and was really curious to see why he was here. The guy told me that he had just gotten off of work, and he realized that he dropped his wallet in my house. When he said this, instantly I was suspicious. He asked if he could come inside and look for it. Now, I had been inside for a few hours and didn't see a wallet. Plus, I had been to the bathroom and never saw it there either. I was sure that I would have. I told the man that I didn't think it was here, but I could quick look for him. He said no, he knew where it was, and he knew that it was here. So I started to ask him where it was, but he then just walked right into my house. He said he would just be a second. The man blew past me and went towards the hallway. Then I watched him enter the hallway, but instead of going to the bathroom, he went into my bedroom, which was directly across from it. He then closed the door and I heard it lock. I started to walk over there, and I said that was not the bathroom, but he didn't answer me. By now, I had a really bad feeling about this. I had no idea what was going on or what he was doing. I called out to him several more times, but he said nothing in response. After a few more minutes of me being very confused, I decided to call the police. I dialed 911 and told them of the exact situation. Then I waited. I went near the front door of the house and did not want to go near my bedroom. The entire time, the man stayed there and I didn't hear him at all. The police were pretty quick to arrive and I met them outside. Then they entered my house. Sometime later, they came out with the man. He had been found hiding in my bedroom and was refusing to leave. I'm glad that I called the police on him. I really don't know what exactly he was doing. I'm sure that he probably got fired from the pizza place after that as well, but I still haven't ordered from there since.
I saw some crazy stuff during my time working at a Waffle House. I saw some brawls between drunk family members. I saw some people getting freaky in the booths like they thought no one could see them. And I saw people doing drugs right there at the counter, as if they didn't give a damn who saw or told on them. But the single worst thing I ever saw was something I walked into on a quiet Monday night shift, at a time when I never expected to see anything so haunting or horrifying. Like I said, it was just after midnight, so technically a Tuesday morning, and the only two people seated were these two dudes who looked like they were a little more than just friends. They were sitting at their booth, flirting and holding hands and stuff, then at that point, they both got up and headed for the bathroom. One of my coworkers waited until we were out of earshot to make a very crude joke about how, if they're not out in 3 minutes, I'm going in there to pry them apart. It was just a dumb joke, though. Like, I don't think anyone believed that they were about to do anything unsavory in there. Then, within a minute or two, the older of the two guys walked out of the bathroom, thanked us for his meal, and then wished us good night. As he walked out of the door and over to his car, we figured that he'd wait for his boyfriend or husband or whatever. Even as he got into the driver's seat and started the engine, my buddy and I figured any minute now, little Twinkerbell in the bathroom there is going to come running out to join his boo. But no. The older guy slams his door shut, backs up his car, and then drives out of the parking lot and off into the night. We're both like, huh, that's weird. Where's the other guy? Then, after a minute or two of waiting around, I volunteered to head into the bathroom to see what the deal was. I honestly figured the younger guy would be in the bathroom, probably just still in a stall, crying because the older dude had just broken up with him or something like that. That, or maybe the younger dude couldn't handle his liquor, puked all over the bathroom, and then the older guy was just like, F this crap, I'm out of here. I remember pushing open the door, calling out, hello? Anyone in here? And the question immediately struck me as dumb because, unless they escaped out the air vents, there had to be someone in there. Right away I could see that there was someone sitting in the toilet in one of the stalls, but the fact they didn't respond to my question had me mildly concerned. I asked, "You okay there, buddy?" And when that question got no reply, I knew I had to check on the guy to make sure he was okay. We didn't get a lot of drug use, but it was always a possibility being a late-night spot, so it dawned on me that the guy might be overdosing or something like that, and I knew I had to act fast. I walked over to the stall, tapped on the door, but it moved, showing that it was unlocked. I then pushed it open a little more, and as it touched the guy's knees, it was just enough gentle force to push him off balance and send him falling off the toilet to his right. And the second he hit the floor, I could see something poking out of his right eye. His left was wide open and undamaged, and he seemed totally unconscious, but there was clearly something long and thin sticking out of his eye in a way that I couldn't see the exact entry wound, but I knew it must have been bad, because there was a lot of blood dripping off whatever it was that was stuck in there, on top of what was all over his clothes and on the floor, too. I immediately felt sick, but rushed to call the cops and told my coworker to lock the front doors because the restaurant was now a murder scene. And that's what it looked like to me anyway. All that blood and an unconscious person who's been stabbed right through the eye, and one who hadn't responded to anything I'd said. I was almost positive that guy was dead. So imagine my surprise when the ambulance shows up. We walked into the bathroom, and the guy that I thought was dead was just stumbling around the bathroom with a hand partially covering his wounded eye. I think the poor guy suffered some kind of horrible brain injury or something. The EMTs were telling him, "Don't touch your eye," and not only was he acting like he couldn't understand them, but the stuff he kept responding with was like nonsense baby talk. It was really distressing to see, and I had to leave the room as the EMTs went to work on the guy and then wheeled him out to the ambulance. The cops showed up around the same time, then after locking the doors behind them, we threw up a closed sign and then got to talking to the cops and giving them descriptions of both the older guy and the car he was driving. Nothing I ever did or saw was crazier or scarier than what I saw that night, and frankly, I'm glad nothing ever topped it. But the thing that haunts me so much about the whole thing wasn't just how that poor guy got stabbed in the eye so deep it messed with his brain. It's how we never found exactly what happened or why it happened in the first place. We didn't hear any screaming or yelling, which you'd figured if there was a fight like that, someone would have made enough noise to attract our attention. But it was totally quiet in there. Those two guys looked like such a happy couple, and on the way out, the guy who had done the eye stabbing didn't seem to even have broken a sweat. He seemed relaxed, had a big smile on his face, and was perfectly charming and polite when he thanked us for everything we did that night. But all that, after he just tried to kill someone in our men's bathroom. Like I said, I saw my fair share of crazy fights and served my fair share of creepy customers, but none of those memories keeps me up at night, like remembering the way that guy smiled as he walked out. It was like taking someone's life, or at least trying to take it, was like the most normal thing in the world to him.
Something really weird happened to me one time when I went to Walmart. I arrived there one night to do a little shopping. I needed toothpaste, soap, milk, and yogurt. I went to the store at nighttime, but not that late. It was about 8 o'clock. So when I got into the store, it was still fairly busy. In this Walmart, the health products were to the right at the front of the store, almost right after you walk in. Then groceries, on the other hand, were at the complete opposite side of the store. I went in the right side doors, and after walking in, I went to the far right side to the health products first. There I got the toothpaste, but I completely forgot about the soap. So I walked all the way to the other side of the store to get groceries. Now I walked through a few aisles, and it was sometime over there that I noticed this woman behind me. She was shorter than me, had blonde hair, and was wearing jeans and a black sweater. I thought nothing of it, and I just assumed her to be another shopper. But I remember I walked through a couple of aisles, and she was still walking behind me. I noticed it, but was still not thinking that it was strange. She was not right behind me or anything. She was probably like 30 feet back or so. But after picking up something else, I remembered the soap, and I realized that I had to go to the complete other side of the store again. So I started to walk there. When I had completely left the grocery section, that's when I realized that the woman was still behind me. I made it to the middle part of the store where the clothes are. I remember that I stopped to look at socks, and when I did, the woman stopped nearby. It was then that I got really suspicious, and it seemed like she was following me. I looked over at her while browsing the socks. She was not directly looking at me. She was either looking or pretending to look at some other clothes nearby. I didn't know what the deal was, but I thought that maybe she was a secret shopper or somebody that worked for Walmart. She might have been following me thinking that I was suspicious or going to steal something. That thought made me angry because I was not going to steal anything and I hadn't done anything suspicious. But that's the only reason I could think of as to why she might be following me. So at that point, I abruptly stopped looking at the socks and I walked back over to the health products. I got to the soap, stopped, and looked around. There I saw the same woman arriving to the area. So now there was no question that she was following me. But why? I decided to confront her. I walked over to the woman who stood at the end of the aisle. However, as soon as I started to approach her, she looked up at me in a surprised way. Then she turned and very quickly walked in the opposite direction. I said, "Excuse me," but she ignored it and hurriedly walked away and then went into a random aisle. I just stood there and shook my head. At least she was gone now. Who knows why she was following me? So I got the soap, and then I headed over to the checkouts. While in line for a self-checkout though, I saw her again. The woman was standing a ways away, pretending to look at another item. I ignored her. I checked out and then started walking for the exit. But when I was walking out the door, I looked back and I saw this woman yet again. She was also walking to the doors to leave, and she had no bag or items in her hands, indicating that she hadn't bought anything. So apparently, she had just been walking around the store following me. I kept going and walked out to my car. I got inside and then quickly looked around for the woman. I did not see her at all, so I felt at that point like the weird experience was finally over and I would go home. I started up my car and drove out of the Walmart parking lot. When I left and merged onto the road, a car behind me did as well. Then I turned at the next light, and I noticed the car behind me doing the same thing. That's when I had the thought that maybe this was the woman. So at that point, I decided to test it out. I figured that I was just paranoid until I turned and the car behind me did as well. I could see that it was a normal looking sedan, but I couldn't see much else with it being nighttime. I could not confirm that the woman was driving it. Wherever I turned though, the car behind me did as well. I went in the direction of my house, but I didn't want to get all the way there being followed. After a while, with the woman still behind me, I pulled over to the side of the road. I was on a quieter street with not much traffic. This could have been dangerous, but I was angry. I decided to confront her again. When I pulled over randomly, the car behind me did the same. Then we both sat there on the side of the road for a few moments. Neither of us got out. At last, I opened the door and I got out of my car, and I started walking back towards the car behind me. When I did, I saw the same woman was behind the wheel, except she did not allow me to get to her driver's door. She quickly and abruptly put her car into drive and drove away back onto the street, and in the process of doing this, nearly hit me. She probably came within 2 feet of me. She had driven off down the road, and then I got back into my car. I thought she might finally be gone. However, I noticed her stopping way up the street. I realized that if I drove past, she would likely keep tailing me, so I made a U-turn. This didn't work though. The woman did the same thing, and before 30 seconds had gone by, she was back on my tail. I didn't really know what to do. I kept driving, making random turns for a while. Then I started heading back to my house. She was still following me. So I called the police and reported what was going on. I gave them the street that we were on and a description of the woman's car. I told them that I was going to keep driving straight on that road. After like 5 minutes, I saw flashing lights behind me. The woman pulled over and the police did as well. I kept going and was finally able to make it back home. The police called me back and said that the woman denied following me, but was cited for not having a valid ID. I was not surprised that she denied it, but I was also glad that she didn't get to my house. I don't know why she had been following me. I haven't seen her since, and I'm hoping that I never do again.
Worst thing I ever saw at a Waffle House started as one of the nicest things I'd ever seen at a Waffle House. There's probably something deeply philosophical in there somewhere, but I'll be damned if it's me that's finding that. So, me and a fellow buddy stopped by a Waffle House in Gainesville a few years back, first and last time we ever stopped there. Then, as we're eating, a man comes walking through the doors and gets the reception of a minor celebrity, and we soon figured out why. The moment after the guy walked through the doors, different groups at different tables started trying to get his attention. It was just after 2 a.m, but the place was still really busy because it had all the Saturday night drinkers in there. So there was a whole bunch of people calling out, "Mr. Brewer, over here, Mr. Brewer," and stuff like that. And my buddy and I were like, what's going on? But like I said, we soon found out. Mr. Brewer was obviously some kind of big shot, or at least he sure played it that way, because he starts walking to each of the tables that seem to recognize him and handing out wads of cash. And he's not just giving them the money, he's sitting down with them, talking to them, asking about their families and their jobs and stuff, real pillar of the community type things. And some folks are refusing the money and are just happy to check in with him, but others, and I mean no offense by this, look like they needed it, you know? So they seemed only too happy to take his money. Anyway, this guy carries on going from table to table, then when he seemed done with his rounds, he stood up and waved goodbye to everyone as he walked towards the doors. But then, as he's walking, some lady in the back starts calling out something like, "Why didn't you pay for our meal?" I looked over, and the lady and her old man were looking over at this Mr. Brewer guy, and they looked mad. Mr. Brewer starts telling them that he can't pay for everyone's meal. But this doesn't go down well with the lady and her man, and she starts saying how Brewer there was trying to embarrass them or something. And by this point, people were telling the lady to shut up, and this is making her man even madder, talking about, "Don't you talk to my woman that way." But Mr. Brewer is chill, tells everyone to pipe down, then basically explains that if they're going to be so rude, he's most definitely not paying for their food. People start clapping and cheering, and it's all amped up to 11 because most people are drunk out of their minds. But again, the rude couple do not take this well, and the angry man gets up, marches toward Mr. Brewer, and takes a swing at him. The guy is drunk, and Brewer seems sober as a judge, so the swing completely misses, and then people are jumping in to separate them and push the instigator out of the Waffle House. There were people keeping him outside, people making sure Mr. Brewer was okay, and people yelling at the rude lady to get outside and control her man. My buddy and I are just trapped in the middle of all that chaos, so we're both just like, let's get the hell out of here. And after taking a few final sporkfuls of food, we got up and head towards the door, right in time for the shooting to start. I didn't see where the shots came from, but I saw Mr. Brewer just buckle and hit the floor. Then the next thing, someone's getting wrestled to the ground outside, and the cops showed up just in time to put the cuffs on him while folks outside helped hold him down. The shooter was that angry guy trying to defend his woman's honor or whatever, and he just killed a man because he wouldn't give him money to pay for his waffles. I think that was probably the worst thing I ever saw, not just in a Waffle House either, ever. And my mom loved that movie, To Kill a Mockingbird, and I once asked her why it was called something like that when there was no mockingbirds in it. And she told me it was because it was the worst kind of sin to kill a mockingbird, because all they did was sing and make folks happy. And I feel like that's what Angry Guy with the Gun did. He killed a mockingbird. And I just pray that he realizes what he did and what a terrible, terrible sin it was.
When I was 19, I came home from college to stay with my mom for the summer. She had recently divorced my stepfather and had moved from a house to a ground-level apartment. One day I was sitting on the toilet and I had saw a light coming through the vent in the floor. Looking closer, I saw two brown eyes staring up at me. I screamed through a towel on the vent and then ran to tell my mom and boyfriend what had happened. They initially thought I was kidding until they realized that I was genuinely freaked out by this. This particular complex had these weird locked crawl space type access points. The police found that the vents had been pried open, but they had never found who did it. I'm assuming a maintenance worker. Needless to say, my mom moved out fairly quickly. After that experience, I always to this day check the vents, floor or ceiling. This happened over 20 years ago, but it still really creeps me out. Update. I've had a few days to reflect upon this story. You know, as creepy as that event was, I had another situation arise a few years ago. In 2007, I learned that a prominent psychologist that I worked for in Seattle in the early 90s committed suicide after it was discovered that he was filming his clients and employees in the bathroom of his office. He was arrested, lost his license, and then offed himself. It turns out that he had hid his camera in one of those Airwick automatic air freshener units. The guy was a real ass. I quit the job because he was a lecherous, condescending ass. This was around 1993, and I wonder if there were tiny cameras back then, and if he was filming all the 20-something females who worked for him. It's really so disturbing how many awful people there are in the world.
Years ago, I worked at a Walmart. I worked there for about 6 months, and I would mostly work late at night stocking shelves. So one time, I started working at like 10 p.m. when the store was still open. Of course, most of the customers were gone by then, and things were pretty quiet. However, there were still a few people shopping here and there. I was in the grocery department stocking one of the back shelves. I was by myself, and no other employees or customers were in the general area. After a while of this, I saw this one guy start to enter the aisle though. I had heard him walking into the aisle, so I looked over and then I saw the guy. He was standing at the very end of the aisle, just looking at me. And the strange part was that the man was wearing a ski mask over his face. It still had a tag on it, so I figured that he took it from somewhere else inside the store where we sold them. After looking over at him, I looked back to what I was doing, but I could tell that the man was still standing there and looking at me. It was kind of weird, and this went on for probably over a minute. Then, finally, I felt the man approaching. I looked and saw him walking towards me. When he got closer, he asked me if I could show him where the beans were. I just ignored the ski mask and I said yes, I could show him. So the man followed me as I walked 3 aisles over to where the beans were. I told the man that just about every kind of bean was in that aisle. He said thank you and then walked into the aisle. Then I went back to where I had been before. I thought that it was strange for the guy to just be wearing a ski mask in a Walmart, but it was Walmart after all, so not that strange, I guess. I just went back to work, continuing what I had been doing before. Well, for the rest of my shift that night, things went by pretty smoothly. The store closed not long after my interaction with the guy, and I was assuming that he left after that as well. I did not see him for the rest of my shift either. So after work that day, I drove back to my apartment and then went to sleep. Obviously, with working overnight hours, my sleeping schedule was odd. When I woke up, I remembered that I was going to get something to eat. I was going to leave my place, but as soon as I opened the door to go into the hallway, I saw something. On the floor, directly in front of my door, was a bunch of beans. There were cans of baked beans from various brands, as well as cans of green beans, and then bags of kidney beans and pinto beans. I remembered the masked man who asked me to show him where the beans were. Was this a joke? It certainly was not one of my friends, because even with the mask, I would have known. But how would this person know where I lived? I told my friends about it and nobody confessed. To this day, I never found out. It's kind of creepy, but also sort of funny.
I'm a 29-year-old male from Manchester, England. This event in this story occurred 14 years ago when I was 15 years old, so I'll try to remember this in as much detail as I can. I was in the Manchester Victoria train station waiting to catch a train to Liverpool, where I'm originally from. I moved to Manchester at age 2, a lucky escape from a lifetime of scousehood. My train wasn't for another 25 to 30 minutes or so I decided to go and stand outside the station for a cigarette. I wasn't legal to smoke back then, but not far off, and I looked around 18 to other people, so I never really thought anything of smoking in busy public places like that, and always have been a streetwise, rebellious, and a little rough type of lad. So I wasn't the kind of underage smoker who'd be cowering out of sight in an alley somewhere, scared of getting caught. I'd been stood smoking my cigarette for around 5 minutes, lost in thought and planning my escapades during my month-long stay at my uncle's house in Liverpool, and I had been about halfway done with my cigarette when a slightly scruffy, lightly smaller man of around 40 years old approached me and asked for a light. After handing my lighter back, he settles next to me on the wall outside the station, and he then tells me that he's pissed off because he can't roll joints, and his girlfriend wouldn't roll for him because they argued. I'm a bit taken aback by such forwardness, but not too much, as I was wearing a bandana with weed leaves all over it, and I took that as the reason for this man's openness with his drug business, considering this was 2001. But I, being 15 years old and full of bravado and not enough common sense, I had started boasting about how well I could roll a joint, leading to the man asking me to come over to the canal to roll his tin bag up into a few joints for him in exchange for £5. Now, I'm not and never was a stupid person, and this already seemed a little off to me, as I knew the Manchester Canal to be notorious for gay activity and street robbery. But as stated before, I was 15, lacking in fear, and seeing that this guy was smaller than me, I decided he'd come off worse if he tried to have sex with me or harm me. So we went to the canal, him having handed me the $5 as soon as I agreed. He passed me his weed and papers, and we sat on a bench as I got to work, him making small talk and me doing my best to answer whilst concentrating on the spliff building. I remember I wasn't really fully registering his words, and I was just replying back with generic yes and such, until he then asked me if I was still a virgin. This made me pay a bit more attention, as coupled with the location and its reputation, this put me on edge and I tensed up a little. Although I answered his question with a quick, "Nah, I've got a girl." At this point, I'm only halfway through rolling the first joint, and the man begins to act paranoid as hell. If I could try to explain where we were for a second, we were in an area off to the side of the canal, with the station back up a ramp behind us, a bridge leading from one street to another via crossing the canal about 100 yards down and to the left, and then a tunnel underneath the railway line, about 150 yards down the path to the right. The man starts saying he's worried about police coming, as somebody just walked over the bridge and saw me skinning up, according to him, and he suggests we walk down to the right-hand path and under the tunnel where we'd be out of sight from the bridge. Again, overconfident and telling the man that I want one of the joints if I miss my train. I agree, and we gather up the stuff together and then move off toward the bridge once I'd done the first joint, which he then tells me to light and go first on, which I do. As we walked, he said something else to me, and it brought home the real reality of my situation, and it made me seethe with anger, feeling a mixture of disbelief and insult that he'd even think of trying this on me.
"So, have you ever sucked a before?"
What?" I replied.
"It's good, you know. Receiving feels even better. Ever had a man suck you off?"
At this point, I'm stunned and speechless, struggling to hold back a rising tide of anger and indignation. I have always had an issue with taking people's disrespect, and lying to me in order to put me in a position with ulterior motives is high disrespect in my opinion. I've stopped walking at this point, as is he, and I'm seriously debating whether or not to try and take this man's jaw off his face when I decided against it, thinking back to the person on the bridge that the man claimed to have seen me earlier, and thinking that there might be police headed over this way shortly. I throw the joint in the water and the weed and things at the man's feet with an angry exclamation of, "You damn creep! Who the hell do you think you are saying some nasty ass shit like that to me? Get the hell away from me!" I don't think he expected such a strong, confident reaction from such a young lad as myself, because now he seemed stunned in silence and didn't even react to his own weed being thrown about or me walking off back the path toward the station, telling him to screw off and I'd break his neck if he ever came anywhere near me again. He just stared at me, looking vacantly until I lost sight of him. I felt like I'd really won in this situation at the time. I'd got $5 stoned and bagged down a man more than twice my age, so I felt pretty good about how it turned out. Then about 3 years ago, a man went missing after a Stone Roses concert in Heaton Park, Manchester, a couple of miles from the canal. His body was pulled out of the canal a short time after, in the wake of massive national media attention. He had somehow got separated from his friends, inexplicably ended up halfway across the city and in the canal. His case highlighted many dozens of similar deaths, always of young men who have went missing in Manchester over the last 20 years or so, only to be pulled out of the canal dead and in some cases with signs of foul play present. There's quite a lot of controversy around these deaths, as the people of Manchester feel they may have a serial killer on the loose, putting all these young fit men in the canal. And up until recently, the police refused to look into these deaths properly, assuming them all absurdly to be drunken accidents by the young men attempting to piss in the canal while inebriated and falling in and drowning. I don't really know what the truth is, but it is a fascinating subject, and it can be found online with a simple search for Manchester Canal Killer or something similar.
I used to work at a Waffle House, and we used to have this one family stop in whose kid was a total psycho, but also had some pretty serious learning difficulties too, so it was a difficult situation to say the least. I think he was only like 13 or 14, but we used to joke about how his parents must have been slipping supplements into his milk bottle or whatever because he was huge for his age. And that was just about the only funny thing about him though. Everything else was a total nightmare. He beat up 2 employees one day, broke one of their noses and did thousands of dollars in damage to both company property and staffs. Televisions, windows, doors, gaming systems, windshields, glasses, phones, you name it, he broke it. His parents used to get mad at us if we called the police to help us. They didn't want him to get a bad reputation in the community, which was ironic because I'm not sure his rep could be any worse. We weren't officially forbidden from personally pressing charges, but it was not encouraged. Everyone did everything to make sure he never faced any consequences. For the 2 staff that he pulverized, he had to draw a picture to say he was sorry. He finished the picture and his parents brought him along to present it to us with an apology. And I swear to God, he looked one of my coworkers dead in the eyes and said, "I'm not sorry. I'm glad I did it. I wish I'd hurt them worse." His mom yelled at him, told him not to be so rude, and I don't think any of us were all surprised. I ended up dealing with him on a couple of other occasions, and when he wasn't in a rage, he had his moments of decency. In one of our calmer conversations, he was playing Legos, and I asked him if he'd like to talk about some ways to avoid hurting people when he gets angry. The kid looked me dead in the eyes and said, "No, I don't want to stop hurting people. I like hurting people." I asked him why, and he shrugged and told me, "I just like it. It's fun." I still think about that kid from time to time, and whenever I do, I wonder how much longer it'll be before I see him featured in some online news article about how he's killed someone or beaten them half to death, something violent in nature anyway. I hope his family have found more effective ways to deal with whatever he was suffering with, but to be brutally honest, I think the way they treated him made him worse and worse. You can't have kids like that thinking there's no consequences, even if they are a little slow. And that's how you end up with the Green River Killers or Sons of Sam, as I said, I wonder what they'll call that kid if worse comes to worse, and he ends up taking a life instead of making one for himself.
One Saturday morning last year, I went to Walmart to get a few things. There's a Walmart basically 2 or 3 minutes from where I live. I knew that this Walmart gets really busy basically all day, so I specifically went at like 8 a.m. When I arrived, it wasn't too busy yet. I was just getting several items in the produce section of the store. It took me maybe 5 to 10 minutes to get everything. Then I headed up to the checkouts and got the items without a problem. After that though, I walked out to my car, which was parked pretty much right in the middle of the parking lot. There were a decent amount of other cars around. As I approached my vehicle though, I saw this guy standing nearby. He didn't really seem to be doing anything. I reached my car and the man started to approach me. This gave me a bad feeling for some reason. I looked over to the man and he said hi to me. Then he told me that his car was broken and he asked me if I could help him figure out what was wrong. I really didn't know anything about cars. I told the man that I couldn't be much help to him. He still asked that I go over to his car though. I asked him where his car was, and he pointed to a sedan that was a few spaces away. I don't know why, but I walked over to the guy's car with him at that point. I asked him to tell me what exactly the problem seemed to be. The guy didn't really say anything though. When we arrived at his car, he surprisingly asked me to get inside. He told me to go in the passenger side, because that's where things seemed really weird. I didn't know what he meant by that, but it sure seemed suspicious. I said that I was good where I was and told him to try starting the car. He did not though. He told me to just get in. I told him to start it first, but he did not. This made me even more suspicious, so I told him that I had to go and I began walking away. The man didn't say anything back to me right then, so I continued walking away. I went all the way back to my car and then I got inside of the driver's door. Right after doing so, I noticed my passenger side door opening up. The same man was suddenly getting inside my car. I hadn't noticed him walking over to me. I looked over, very confused, and before I had a chance to say anything, the guy told me to start the car and drive. I did the opposite. I got out of the car and bolted for the store. I sprinted all the way back inside of Walmart and then I called 911. The guy was still inside of my car, but he didn't have my keys or anything. He hadn't bothered to chase me. I waited inside of the Walmart until the police got there. When they did though, the man and his car were gone. I answered some questions and was told that they were going to review security footage. In the end though, I don't know what happened. I'm just glad that I got away from him.
One evening, I was out in Lacey, Washington to pick up a handgun that I had recently purchased for protection. Contrary to the pickup status both online and sent to my email, the store didn't have it in stock yet and told me to come back in another week. I lived about an hour from Lacey at the time, and when I had gotten there, evening rush hour was just beginning to become unbearable. I didn't want to drive all the way back home just yet, as it would add an additional hour to my already long commute. Side note, the car that I was driving belonged to my dad, and I was borrowing it until I had enough money saved up for a new car after my beloved Honda had broken down the previous year. I killed some time bumming around the store that I had purchased my firearm from, and then decided to drive over to the nearest coffee shop. It was a newly built cabin-style cafe with a modern twist. The barista handed me my 16-ounce dirty chai, and I walked back out to my car. I then drove to a gas station around the corner, still trying to kill time until traffic thinned out. The car didn't need gas, so I pulled into a parking spot right at the corner of the four-way intersection where the gas station was located. I turned off the engine, stepped outside, and lit a cigarette, leaning against the driver's side door to avoid stinking up the interior. The weather was overcast and drizzly, but not overly cold. It was dusk, and most of the daylight had faded. The stoplights at the intersection were diffused by the late autumn mist, and I watched them flicker from green to yellow to red and black again as the traffic moved in sync with their signals. Zoned out by the lights and generally lost in thought while enjoying my coffee and smoke, I didn't notice the man walking toward me until he was already halfway across the street. He was a white guy of average height and strawberry blonde hair, perhaps in his mid-20s. He definitely hadn't changed his clothes in a while and carried a backpack that I assume held the few belongings that he had. He didn't smell, but he looked raggedy and unkempt. My immediate thought was that drugs were likely part of his lifestyle. I didn't want to jump to conclusions, but I'm always cautious, having grown up in the suburbs of Seattle. The man finished crossing the street and awkwardly limped toward my car, maintaining eye contact and a strained grin. I locked my car out of caution but remained outside, smoking casually. Normally, I'm a social person, but I don't go out of my way to be unpleasant either. He approached me and stood about 10 feet away when he said hello and asked if I had a light. I hesitated, but saw no harm in fulfilling this very simple request. Taking 2 steps forward, I lit a cigarette, which he held out toward me as he approached. He attempted to make small talk, weaving in hints that he had just gotten off the bus and still needed to go another block down the road. Somewhere in his poorly crafted sob story, he stopped mid-sentence, kind of like a bad actor, and pretended to be struck by an epiphany. "Hey, would you mind just dropping me off down the road? It's not very far." I apologized and said I couldn't help because it was my dad's car, not mine, and I didn't feel comfortable driving it without his permission. A stupid but plausible excuse that I came up with on the spot. Mr. Unkempt did not like my answer, and his smile immediately turned tense and flatlined. Clearly upset, he became more insistent. "But it's just down the road," he whined. "My leg is killing me. It wouldn't even be far for you. I'll give you a cigarette." His persistence and sudden burst of hostility made my hair stand on end, and I firmly said, "No, I'm sorry. I can't help you. It's my dad's car, and he's got set rules, all right?" With 10 years of hospitality experience under my belt, I immediately offered him alternative ideas for how he could get to where he needed to be. I even suggested that maybe someone inside the gas station could help him out or call him a ride. Each word I said made him increasingly irate, and he began curling his fingers into fists, not in a threatening way, but like a toddler about to scream bloody murder for not getting their way. He seemed to pause and size me up for a very fleeting moment. I'm small and not at all intimidating physically, so I told him that I hoped he made it home safe, quickly unlocked my car, jumped in and locked myself inside. When I looked up from locking the car door, I saw him speed walking back across the street, heading in the direction that he originally come from. No limp, no awkward walk whatsoever. No distress or pain even showing slightly. Just the normal speed walk of a physically well person. A very rage-filled person. I know I had dodged a bullet there, and I felt pretty dumb for hanging around the city after dark alone. And at this point, I didn't care about traffic anymore, so I started the engine and hightailed it home in what ended up being an hour and 45-minute drive. But this time the traffic was 100% worth the inconvenience. And PSA, if you haven't heard it enough already, be careful who you give your attention to, especially when you're alone. Stay aware at all times and err on the side of caution, even when strangers seem harmless at first.
Do you know what it feels like to have a gun aimed at you? To hear the sickening crack of a bullet through bone? To see blood spurt like a crimson fountain? Before that Halloween, I didn't. I was just a sweet kid who loved candy, trick-or-treating and dressing up in costumes. You notice how I'm speaking in the past tense? That's because something happened. Something that shattered my love for Halloween forever. I'm only 16 now, but after that horrific night, I carry enough trauma for a lifetime. "We are too old for this," Josh grumbled as I dragged him along. Josh was my best friend, but he hated Halloween. "Don't be a buzzkill. I can't go trick-or-treating alone," I pleaded, shaking my candy bag at him. "We're only 13 once. Let's enjoy it while we can. We can't hit up the cool Halloween parties like our brothers. Josh asked, pouting, the feelers on his bee costume bobbing. I shot him a stern look, and he wilted under my glare. That's the thing about Josh. He'd follow along with anything if I insisted hard enough. We hit a couple of houses and loaded up on candy. Bouncing from porch to porch, the decorations were amazing. Jack-o'-lanterns glowing, creepy scarecrows looming, fake cobwebs strung everywhere. I felt great in my Tinkerbell costume. But Josh, his attitude didn't seem to improve. Then, as we rounded the corner, Josh's face lit up. "Hey, that's my dad!" he yelled. Sure enough, it was Mr. Morrison, dressed like a pirate, complete with an eye patch and a fake parrot on his shoulder. "Hey kids, having fun?" he asked, grinning. "We're doing great, Mr. Morrison," I said, showing him my overflowing bag of candy. "Why are you out here?" "I'm trick-or-treating for Jenny," he replied. "She's too young to come this far, so I'm getting her a little candy." He held up a small bag and winked. "Awesome! Let's hit that house together," Josh said, pointing to an unlit house down the street. I stopped. Something about that house chilled me. It was dark, with no decorations, and the yard was filled with broken bottles and scattered debris. A cold shiver crept down my spine as my heart started to race. I thought, just for a moment, I heard something. A voice, soft, raspy, almost like a deathly whisper, echoed in my mind. I couldn't make out any words, just an unintelligible sound that made my blood freeze. "Did you hear that?" I asked. Josh and his dad just looked at me, confused. But I heard it again, or at least I was sure I did. That same monotone whisper. "Let's go home," I said quietly, dread setting into my stomach. "Go home? You're the one who dragged me out here," Josh laughed, bounding towards the eerie house. Mr. Morrison followed close behind, and I reluctantly trailed after them, my heart pounding in my chest. "Trick or treat!" they yelled at the door, laughing. The silence that followed was deafening. And then, it happened. The front door exploded in a hail of bullets, the wood splintering under the barrage. Gunshot echoed through the night. It took me a second to understand what was happening. I dropped to the ground, covering my head. But I wasn't fast enough. A bullet tore into my shoulder, and a sharp, unbearable pain shot through me. The gunfire didn't stop. It went on for what felt like forever. Then, as suddenly as it had begun, the shooting ceased. A man stumbled out onto the porch, holding a smoking AK, his face pale and twisted with regret. I thought it was them," he stammered. I thought it was the ops. I'm so sorry." His eyes fell onto something near my feet. His face crumbled. I followed his gaze and froze. Josh was lying on the ground, his eyes wide open, lifeless. Blood pooled around him, 2 bullet holes marring his skull. There was no mistaking it. He was dead. A single scream cut through the night. Josh's father, lying a few feet away, bleeding from his wounds, sobbed uncontrollably. "My boy! My boy!" The police and the EMTs arrived shortly after. The man who shot at us was a gang member, paranoid and expecting an attack from his enemies. He thought we were them. A mistake. But Josh was still gone. My shoulder healed, but the pain in my heart never left. Sometimes, I wonder if it was my fault for dragging Josh out that night. Other times, I think, about what I thought I saw and heard, and none of it made any sense. While this story is fictional, it was inspired by real events. On Halloween 2008, 12-year-old TJ Darnson was shot and killed while trick-or-treating. After knocking on a door, the shooter, a convicted drug dealer, mistook TJ for an enemy and fired 29 rounds. So next time you go trick-or-treating, be careful of the houses you approach, please. None of us want to be turned into Swiss. The moon hung high in the sky, casting a gentle glow over the crowded streets of Quebec. Everywhere I looked, people were dressed in costumes, rushing through the night. Immersed in the Halloween spirit, I too was excited and swept up by the excitement. Moving from the house to house, shouting trick or treat. I was wearing a brown costume and a white bunny costume. Casey and Paul were with me. The three of us had been best friends since kindergarten. When you're 12, Halloween is all about costumes and candy. You don't think about its dark origins or the eerie legends that linger. But that night, I learned more than I ever wanted to, and since then, I've never gone out trick-or-treating again. "I think we have enough candy," Cassie said, showing us her bag, brimming with sweets of all kinds. "No, we could do a couple more houses," I replied, walking up the stairs of another house, forcing her and Paul to follow me. A nice old lady answered the door and handed us a bunch of sweets with a warm smile. As we made our way down the stairs, Paul tugged at my sleeve, his expression uneasy. "Guys, I think it's getting late. We should head back," Paul said, his eyes darting nervously around. Casey sighed. "Yeah, I got more than enough. Look at my bag. It's about to burst." I scoffed, my eyes rolling. "Come on, just a few more houses." Paul shook his head. "No, really, I can't eat all of this candy." "Fine, leave then," I said, pushing ahead towards the next house. Cassie hesitated for a second, before shrugging and following Paul as they walked off. I watched them leave, annoyed. Determined to get one last haul, I walked up the steps to a house at the end of the block. It was dimly lit, its porch creaking beneath my feet. I rang the doorbell, but heard no movement inside. Just as I turned to leave, a police officer passed by on the street. "Hey, kid," he called out. "You should head home. It's getting late." I glanced back at him. "Yeah, okay," I muttered, not really intending to listen. But as he walked away, something changed. The festive sounds of laughter and footsteps faded away, replaced by an eerie, suffocating silence. Stopped in my tracks, a strange feeling settled in my chest. Like I wasn't alone. Like someone was watching me. The air thickened, and I realized a thick fog had crept in out of nowhere, swirling around me. Suddenly, from within the fog, two glowing red eyes appeared. My heart pounded as the eyes drew closer, cutting through the mist-like fire. As the fog dissipated, a figure emerged, tall, imposing, clad in full samurai armor. At first, I almost laughed. Nice costume, I thought. But then, I saw it. The katana in his hand, dripping with fresh blood. I froze, my brain screaming at me to run, but my legs refused to move. "Sick fit, man!" someone shouted from behind me. I turned to see a guy in a cartoon character costume approaching the samurai, grinning like he didn't have a care in the world. Without a warning, the samurai lashed out, slashing the man's throat with a swift, precise motion. Blood sprayed everywhere, splattering onto my clothes, into my candy bag. The man collapsed, gurgling, clutching his neck as the crimson life drained from him. I stood there, paralyzed, watching as the life drained out of him. I couldn't move. I couldn't scream. My mind couldn't process what was happening. This was real. too real. Across the street, a woman saw the attack. She screamed, her voice piercing the night. The samurai turned his head, slowly, locking eyes with her. In an instant, he was upon her, his katana slicing through the air. She fell to the ground, her clothes blooming with blood. As she gasped for air, I watched, horror-stricken, my body trembling uncontrollably. I wanted to shout. I wanted to run, to do something, anything. But I was frozen. The fog swirled again, thick and unrelenting, swallowing the samurai whole until he disappeared, like a ghost retreating into the night. The silence returned, heavier than before, pressing down on me like a weight. I collapsed to the ground, curling into a ball, shaking uncontrollably. When the police found me, I couldn't speak. My clothes were stained with blood, my candy bag soaked. Of the samurai, there was no trace. They asked me questions, but all I could do was stare into the distance, shivering. Later, I learned the man in the samurai armor had killed 2 people and injured 5 before he was caught. But the knowledge did not bring me any comfort. Since that night, I've never gone out trick-or-treating again. This story is inspired by a real event that took place in Quebec City, Canada, on Halloween night back in 2021. A man dressed in medieval armor went on a violent rampage, killing 2 people and injuring 5. The 24-year-old suspect had been driven by dark, twisted urges and was seemingly out for blood. Disturbingly, he had made threats about carrying out such attacks nearly for 6 years. The tragedy left the city in shock, and its chilling nature serves as the backdrop for this fictional retelling, capturing the fear and horror experienced that night. When I woke up in the hospital, the first thing on my mind was Freddy Krueger. I know that probably sounds super weird, but trust me, you'll understand why once you hear the rest of my story. Just 5 hours before I found myself in the hospital bed, I had been at a Halloween college party. It was one of those no costume, no entry deals. So I was decked out in a tunic like the ones the Greeks used to wear, complete with a masquerade ball mask. I don't remember much about what was going on at the party. Just there was a ton of beer, loud music, and people dancing everywhere. "People just keep coming in," Ethan shouted over the music. "Well, what did you expect?" I shouted back, grinning. "You advertised it as an open party." He scowled at me, clearly regretting the decision. Ethan, my best friend, who had thrown the party but hadn't anticipated the massive turnout. He gave me a look before heading outside, probably to lock the gate. I shrugged it off and went back to dancing. With each sip of beer, I could feel myself getting more and more drunk. After a while, I made my way outside, needing a break from the crowded and sweaty house. The yard was quieter, with a few people passed out on the lawn. What a bunch of losers, I thought to myself. I looked over for Ethan and spotted him by the gate with his brother, Eric. Something was going on, so I moved closer to see what was happening. "You have to let us in, mate," a guy dressed as Freddy Krueger was shouting. Behind him were a few others dressed as classic horror movie characters: Jason, Michael Myers, and Ghostface, just to name a few. They were all demanding entry. "I don't know you, you're not invited, get the hell away from my house," Ethan shot back, clearly agitated. A small crowd from the party was starting to gather by the gate, curious about the commotion. "We're not going anywhere," Freddy said, his tone dripping with anger. Something about the way he said it made the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. Sure, getting denied entry to a party sucks, but his reaction felt off. way too aggressive for someone we didn't even know. "Ethan, let's just go back inside," I said, putting a hand on his shoulder. "You're right. We'll leave these idiots out here and see how they like the cold," he agreed, turning to follow me. "I said, let us the f*** in!" Freddy screamed. The noise from the party suddenly seemed to fade. It was like the whole world went silent for a moment, and an eerie tension settled over us. I don't know if everyone felt it, but I sure did. "Duck!" I screamed, diving into the ground as Freddy pulled a gun from somewhere in his costume and started shooting. The sounds of gunfire was deafening. Screams filled the air as people scattered in every direction, glass shattering as bullets hit windows and cars. I felt a sharp, burning pain in my arm and looked down to see blood seeping through my costume. I had been shot. It all happened so fast. Less than a minute, but it felt like a lifetime. When I finally dared to look up, Freddy and his gang were gone, leaving several people on the ground. My heart sank when I saw Ethan lying there, unmoving. I rushed over to him. He wasn't conscious. Eric and another guy were also down, none of them moving. The ambulance arrived minutes later and rushed them to the university hospital. It wasn't until the medics were gone when I realized I'd been shot too. Shock does that to you. Fortunately, the wound wasn't too bad. The bullet had just grazed my arm, but I knew I needed to get it checked out. So, I got into my car and I started to drive to the hospital. That's when everything hit me. How close I'd come to dying. My hands started shaking, and all I could feel was the panic rising into my chest. My heartbeat raced as my vision blurred. I don't know if it was the blood loss, the alcohol, or both, but I suddenly felt so tired. I lost control of the car and crashed into a building. Then, everything went black. The next thing I knew, I was waking up in the hospital, Freddy Krueger on my mind. Makes sense now, right? I'm just grateful Ethan, Eric, and the other guy who got shot are all okay. They're stable at least. As for Freddy and his friends, no one knows where they went after the shooting. It scares me to think that someone that unhinged is still out there, somewhere. This story is inspired by real events that happened in 2008 in San Antonio, Texas. During a Halloween college party, a man dressed as Freddy Krueger opened fire after being denied entry. 4 people were rushed to the hospital, while the 5th, a female, drove herself but later crashed her car on the way. Freddy Krueger was the one who pulled the trigger, but he was not alone. And although the perpetrators were eventually apprehended, the incident remains a chilling reminder of how sometimes the people under the mask are worse than the characters they cosplay in Halloween.
This event takes place in Washington State in early October of 2010. My girlfriend Beth had flown down from Sydney, Australia to visit me. I lived in Seattle, but since it was cheaper for her to book a flight from Sydney to Vancouver, British Columbia than Seattle, we decided to spend a bit of time in British Columbia and then work our way back to Seattle. After a couple of days in Vancouver, we took a ferry to Vancouver Island in Victoria, where we stayed at the Empress Hotel. The plan from there was to take a ferry from Victoria back to Anacortes in Washington State, and then hop on a bus or train or something to Seattle. Making the most of our last day in Victoria, we didn't get to the ferry terminal prior to the final ferry of the day. I think it departed around 10 p.m. or so. Upon arriving in Anacortes, if you're familiar with how a ferry works, you'll have about 10 minutes or so where a flood of cars disembark and then foot traffic too, as people head to the parking lot to hop in the car they presumably have parked. I had miscalculated on a couple of fronts. Upon checking what I believed to be a bus terminal, There was clearly no bus on the way. There were no cabs either, no public transit options, and whatever kind souls who may have helped us out very rapidly dissipated into the night. The other miscalculation was that the Anacortes ferry terminal was further outside of the city of Anacortes than I remembered. The road to the ferry winds along a mile or more through a wooded area with not even a pedestrian footpath, not uncommon for Washington. To make matters worse, it was raining, as is typical of that time of year. We were stranded, luggage in tow and all. Welcome to the US, Beth. As the ferry traffic vanished and we began to wonder what the hell we were going to do, we were approached by a man, a smile on his face, not in the least bit concerned himself about also appearing to be stranded. I recall him as a bit bigger than me, both in height and weight, probably in his 40s. He was wearing glasses, a raincoat, and a wide-brimmed hat, which he doffed in greeting. At least one of us was dressed appropriately for the weather. He shook my hand and we got to talking about the predicament we were all in, to which he then explained he was waiting for his mom and sister to come pick him up. They were driving down from Bellingham to get him. He said he could offer us a ride once they came, to which I declined, saying we were going the other way to Seattle, not Bellingham. We continued making small talk, and he offered again.
Are you sure that you don't want a ride? They should be here soon.
But I just stuck to declining it because it didn't really seem convenient for any of us. At this point, I was resigned to just finding a hotel room in Anacortes for the night. Eventually, Beth, who was starting to walk up the road away from the ferry terminal, motions to me. Mike, let's go. But there's a pleading urgency to her voice and her face. I say okay and bid the stranger farewell, and we start walking up the road into the dark and rain, luggage in tow. To my surprise, I find that Beth is now alarmed by the meeting we just had, pointing out to me that the man had not been on the ferry. He was already standing around at the terminal when everyone got off the boat. She also pointed out that he had never removed his right hand from his coat pocket. He doffed his hat, he'd shook my hand, and he never took that other hand out of his pocket. I honestly didn't notice this. She, of course, was having visions of me shot in the woods, and Lord only knows what for her. So we trekked up the road and eventually found an inn. But apparently there was some sort of convention in Anacortes that weekend, and every room in town was booked solid. So we then called a cab to take us to a nearby town where we could get a room in a hotel. But in our time walking up the road and waiting for the cab, we never did see a car with what could have been this guy's mom and sister drive to the ferry. We didn't see any cars at all. In the years since, Beth is now my wife, and we do joke that this was our close encounter with a serial killer. Half joking, of course, but also half wondering when news might come to light of something horrible along the northern coast of Puget Sound.
I used to work at Walmart as a cashier. This was 20 years ago now. I'm a female, and I was 20 when this took place. I remember that I worked at a Walmart during college part-time for about 2 years. I was a cashier the entire time. My schedule would be pretty random, but usually I would work about 3 or 4 nights a week. If it was a weekday, the shift would typically be in the afternoon to the nighttime, and if it was a weekend, I would often work in the morning. So one time, I was working at night and just ringing up one customer after another. I don't remember all the details that well with it being so long ago, but I do know that when my shift was almost over, this one guy came into my checkout lane. To be blunt, he was a total creep. I don't remember what he was buying, but one of the first things he said to me while checking out was that he had been watching me. He said that he always sees me working and stuff. I remember that he asked me out, and I said no. At first, he was trying to convince me and saying that I would have a good time going out with him and stuff. I really had no interest. He was at least 20 years older than me as well. I still said no, and finally, I remember the guy walked off. But that was not the last that I saw of him. When I worked a few nights later, similar hours, the man came into my lane again. I remember as soon as I saw him, I had a bad feeling. The first thing he said to me was asking if I had changed my mind. I asked him about what, and he said about going out with him. I said it was still a no from me, and I was really beginning to be creeped out by him. He did leave though, and then I felt better. That very same night, I got off of work at about 10 o'clock. I left the store and got to my car, then I drove home. I lived alone in this little apartment building that was less than 10 minutes away from Walmart. After getting back home, I went inside, but probably like 10 minutes later, there was a knock on my door. When I went to look, I saw the same guy standing there. I was shocked and also really creeped out. I didn't know how this guy would know where I lived unless he followed me home. I didn't answer the door. He knocked and then waited for like another minute, and then he knocked again. This went on for several times. He was still knocking on my door after like 10 minutes. At that point, he started yelling, saying that he knew I was home. At one point, he even tried opening the door. When he continued to not leave, I called the police on him. I told them everything, that I suspected I was followed home and that the guy wouldn't leave. He stayed there and was still right outside my door when the police arrived. When they spoke with the man, he claimed that he was lost or something. That was obviously a lie. He ended up getting banned from my apartment building and was also banned from the Walmart as well. I'm really glad that I never saw the guy again after that.